Think of how many programs that you've heard of that are being sponsored by funds from COVID relief. Doesn't that seem a bit?
Now that they have a good handle on the COVID crisis, many people ask what is next for the Chicago Public Health Department. She says, well, this is it. The health department is allocating $9.6 million in COVID relief funding from the CDC to establish healthy Chicago equity zones. The department is allocating $9.6 million in COVID relief funding from the CDC to establish healthy Chicago equity zones.
Thank God I don't live in Chicago. I really am. I thank God I do not live in Chicago. Let's talk about Miss Lightfoot, Mayor Lightfoot, Chicago. I'm gonna mention a few things about what she did as far as declaring a health emergency, public health emergency in Chicago, because apparently racism as a public health emergency in Chicago. But what I want to touch on the fact that it's bigger than that.
The health department is allocating $9.6 million in COVID relief funding from the CDC to establish healthy Chicago equity zones.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of attention on her specifically. Yeah, sure. She said some things, done some things that I think are out there pretty far. But there's other things going on here that people don't really focus on that I think need to be addressed. So this can't be a bash Lightfoot moment. It can't be all about Mayor Lightfoot. There's a common theme here, though, and part of it is take a look at that, like the Vice President, what she said about root causes and how there's so much emphasis being placed on root causes.
But the reality of it is that we need to prioritize what's happening at the border, and we have to prioritize why people are going to the border.
Yet, we see the exact opposite happening on the ground in this instance in Chicago about racism being a public health crisis. If you notice, there was a little focus put on outcomes, numbers, the disparity in the lifespan between blacks in Chicago and whites in Chicago. There's something there. There's something that needs to be addressed. Absolutely. There are some steps that need to be taken, some actions that need to be taken, and things need to be looked at closely. And in that process, what you can't do is ignore what should be obvious and not talk about what should be obvious, the factors that are driving these results. Just briefly, let's look at that. Okay, what about the gang violence that's happening in Chicago? I mean, you probably stand a greater chance of getting popped and knocked off in Chicago than you do in just about any other place in the United States, especially if you're black, especially if you're a black male like I am. There's a good chance that you'll get knocked off and it won't be a police officer. There's a good chance that it'll be someone who looks just like you. Yet, in the media and on the news, you constantly hear the other side of the story, but you don't hear any talk or anything being done about what's happening on our side. When I say our, I say black people on our side. Now, there's probably a few people who would think that my approach is I'm a sellout for saying this, but I care, and I'd like to see some of these things change. You know, when you hear people talk about Chicago, one of the things people talk about being afraid of is lead poisoning. They're not talking about lead in pipes. They're talking about getting shot, right? Then you have HIV, you have You have uh, a host of things that are negatively impacting the black community. And we don't hear about addressing the root cause of those things. And a large portion of that is accountability. Individual, personal accountability. One of the first things that has to happen is you have to stop condoning certain behaviors or excusing certain behaviors and blaming them on what someone's been through or what's happened to them. What they've been through and what's happened to them is valid. It is. But why did they go through it and why did it happen to them? Now we're going to the root, right? So if we want to go to the root, we have to dig deep. We can't gloss across the surface. What's going on in the community that's causing people to go through what they're going through, and who is perpetrating that? And then why are they perpetrating that? We're not going to act like it's in a vacuum. We're not going to act like that. Like, yes, racism does exist. Yes, racism did exist. Yes, racism has always existed in America since it was formally founded. It has. There's no way around it. No way to dispute that. But you can't tell me that the level of racism in the United States is the same as it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. I don't believe it because the experiences are different. Now we have a new generation who has to dig to find these instances. And what do I mean by that? Dig to find it. This may offend a few people, but when you hear someone speak and they're always speaking about someone else, that means they're digging. That means it's not actually happening to them as an individual. And why is that important? Because you end up with a large group of people who speak from a narrative and highlight the examples that have been put in front of them by the media. And rather than going off personal experience. And as long as you're focused on the examples that have been put, bear with me. Bear with me. If this upsets you, bear with me for a minute. But as long as you're focusing on the examples that have been placed in front of you by the media that you can't directly impact, that are far removed from you as an individual, one, you're not focusing on what's going on directly in your world. You're not giving the attention that it deserves. And two, you will feel powerless. But what if you took all that energy and devoted it towards the things that you should be doing, making sure those around you are doing the things that they should be doing, making sure that your kids coming up in a way and behaving in a manner that they should behave. And when these instances, when racism does in fact occur, directed towards you, you respond accordingly. You point that out. You highlight that. I'm an advocate for that. I'm with that. Point it out. What specific act of racism has been leveled against you as an individual? And now we're talking. Now we can address racism in this country. But don't spend all your time and energy focused on the perception that the media gave you. But moving on to another part of this that I don't think is talked about, I think should be given more attention, is if you notice that in that piece, what's going on in Chicago, the word COVID comes up quite often. COVID relief. Redirecting funds from COVID relief. That seems to be happening a lot now, doesn't it? Think of how many programs that you've heard of that are being sponsored by funds from COVID relief. Doesn't that seem a bit odd to you that there seems to be so much money for so many programs and all of it is tied to the fact that COVID happened? Especially since these programs weren't put in place or announced uh, at the onset of the acquisition of the funds. What do I mean by that? If you take a step back and look at this, this is a misallocation of funds. That's what it is. It's because you said that you were wanting to take funds for a specific reason, and now you're using it for something other than those reasons. Not to say that any of the programs that people are funding or want to fund are invalid. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the way you obtained the funds to fund these programs was fraudulent. It's wrong. We can argue and debate about that all day long, but it's wrong. That's the point that I wanted to get to regarding that news clip of racism being declared a public health emergency in Chicago. That's the part that nobody's really paying attention to. How did they get your money? Under what pretense did they take your money? Because that's essentially what's happening. And who gave them permission to do that? Maybe if we narrowed that down and drilled down a little bit, we could try to put some fingers on exactly who's behind this. But I think it's a lot bigger than any of us realize. This is a planned restructuring is what this is. And whether you're for it or against it, hey, you got the right to think the way you want to think, but how do you feel about being lied to? Do you think it's right to move that way? To say you're going to do one thing and then do something else with the money, with the people's money? Do you think that's cool? And maybe you're just the kind of person who wants to get what you want by any means. Maybe you think that's the way it should work. I mean, entitled to your opinion on that matter, but I think it's pretty interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. As always, like, share, comment, and chime in. Let me know what you think about Mr. Mayor Lightfoot, who seems to be so concerned about the African American community. But if you looked at where they live, pronouns, got to get my pronouns right. If you look at where they live and who they're married to and this, that, and the other, it seems to contradict what they seem to be so vocal about in the public. In any case, listen close. Let me know what you get out of it. Take care. Peace.